So Baldur's Gate 3 is a game full of epic battles, powerful magic, and really deep, harrowing personal stories. But what if I told you that behind all of the fantasy, there's the story of real-world oppression that mirrors the struggle of millions today? The story of the Tiefling refugees. Wait, 1 second. Huh? Cast out, discriminated against, and forced to leave their homes. It isn't just a story for a game. It echoes the struggles of refugees around the world, from Palestine to Syria, forced off their lands and pushed to the margins of society. But here's the thing. While many of us escape into fantasy games like Baldur's Gate 3, to step away from the horrible realities of the oppressive capitalistic world that we live in, getting worse day by day. But in these fantasies, instead of these marginalized people just surviving, what if they actually fought back? What if the Tieflings in Baldur's Gate 3 didn't just accept their discrimination? What if they rose up in revolution and claimed their freedom? Assalamu alaikum, comrades. Today and the following days, as I finish up my Alfira cosplay, I want to talk about why stories of revolution are often ignored in games, and how adding those stories could inspire not just our imaginations, but our view of the world that we live in. So if you don't know me, my name is Izdahar, and I'm a Soviet historian. I talk a lot about communist history in general. I humanize the past that has been often mischaracterized and dehumanized, especially when it comes to the reality of the people and achievements of the Soviet Union, specifically the first 50 years, as well as the long-lasting effects of the Red Scare in the United States, which often ends up the reason why we have such negative views and perspectives and reiterate, reshare, and only translate the worst of the worst examples through history instead of being inspired by that revolutionary past and the potential for a communist or socialist future. I'm also a big nerd, and I do love escapism. And while escapism is a controversial topic in leftist spheres, I am a strong believer that we all need some sort of rest and escape as we live through the hell that is late-stage capitalism and everything burning around us. Of course, in moderation. And I think a way that can really help this sort of moderation, a responsible consumption of fantasy, is by putting real revolutionary stories and inspiration in these forms of escapism. Now, I recently got into cosplay again after years of stepping away from it. I grew up in a rural, poor forest town where my only escape was the communities I was part of online and the 2 or 3 yearly events I could go and travel to the city for and cosplay at. My cat is causing trouble. So I started cosplaying when I was about 12 years old, and I was very active in the community until I was 19 or 20, when I could no longer afford it, and I had already converted to Islam at that point, and began transitioning into wearing a headscarf and feeling out what that form of modesty meant for me, which made cosplay really difficult and impossible from a monetary standpoint. And while much of my time is spent very immersed in my research of this niche perspective of this history, ever since Baldur's Gate 3 came out, I've really rediscovered my love of fandom and escapism through fandom. I already made 1 cosplay last year from Baldur's Gate 3, and I had so much fun making it. I really wanted to make another cosplay that meant more to me. It wasn't just, oh, this works with a headscarf. Last year I did Sister Lidwin from the House of Healing in the Shadow Curse lands. Didn't need to change anything about it to be comfortable for me. But this next cosplay means a lot more to me. I love Tieflings, I love what they represent, and I love their storyline, not just in the game of Baldur's Gate 3, but in D&D and the Forgotten Realms in general. There's a lot of real-world parallels that we don't talk about, and I'm constantly disappointed in the fan content that doesn't include stories of revolution or fighting back, or pull from this history that I myself teach and study when it seems very applicable. And as a Muslim who has witnessed many waves of war and refugees and the ongoing genocide against the Palestinians forced out of their land, I can't help but think about that when I see characters like the Tieflings of El Terrell and the struggle and discrimination that they face. So as I finish this up, I thought I would talk deeper about that concept and bridge that gap of revolutionary inspiration, principled stances in ideology, class consciousness, and awareness of world events and the struggles around us, and the fantasy I also love to escape in as well. Brave traveler, perhaps you have saved the Tiefling refugees in at least one of your playthroughs of Baldur's Gate 3, but are you helping the real-world refugees around you struggling oh so similar fates? And if you're not, why aren't you? So this is a rather noisy project. So while you watch me put together some of these pieces, let's discuss some basics. What exactly is a tiefling, if you don't know? Where do they come from? Why are they treated differently? How does that mirror things today? And also, what role do they play in the game of the year, Baldur's Gate 3? So what is a tiefling? Tieflings are a unique race in Dungeons & Dragons, combining human ancestry with the infernal bloodlines of devils, though their fiendish heritage manifests in physical traits like horns, tails, unusual skin tones, and glowing eyes. Tieflings are fundamentally humanoid and capable of choosing any moral path, but they are often misunderstood or outright discriminated against, stemming from fear and prejudice based on their infernal appearance rather than their actions. Oh, and infernal refers to anything related to the 9 hells and devils in Dungeons & Dragons lore. It encompasses also like the language spoken, the infernal language by devils and those descended of devils. And when it comes to their origin, it usually comes from pacts or deals. An ancestor of the tiefling might have made a pact with the devil for power or wealth, and the infernal influence of that pact marks their bloodline, and descendants inherit those fiendish traits. There's also direct parentage. A tiefling might be a child of a fiend and a mortal, but this is the most rare potential. Now, they come into existence in a few different ways. One is by birthright. A tiefling is usually born to two mortal parents, their infernal heritage skipping generations or appearing without warning. But also, there are just enough tieflings in the world for them to have children that are full-on tiefling. But who are the tiefling refugees? The tieflings in Baldur's Gate 3 are refugees from Elturel, a city dragged into the 9 hells during the events of Baldur's Gate Descent into Avernus. After Elturel's return to the material plane, its people faced persecution, and the tieflings, already marginalized, became the scapegoats and blame to the descent. Driven from their homes, they traveled as a caravan seeking refuge and safety. Displaced and vulnerable, they encounter hostility from others who view them as cursed or dangerous due to that infernal heritage. But their presence in the game reinforces the game's theme of making difficult moral choices and living with the consequences. Your choices of their fate in the game has ripple effects throughout the game and ending. So a lot of the times, fantasy, even when it's make-believe, can be so centered around European-centric or European-esque kingdoms and bloodlines and fall into the same historical tropes. Whether it's Dungeons & Dragons and Baldur's Gate, maybe there's a few questionable Orientalist areas or people. It's just incredibly common, and it tends to lean into this idea of the chosen one sort of trope, or an oppressed minority who becomes a part of the ruling class, the very system that oppressed them, the exception. Rather than exploring those potential radical possibilities. Why is the solution for the oppressed people in fantasy media so often just to rise up within the existing hierarchy, and that's somehow their redemption story, rather than overcoming the oppressive system itself? Sometimes you'll have some radical things sprinkled in here and there. There's the communist rat. That was a delight.
Halt, oppressor! I am reclaiming the victuals in this basement for the good of ratkind! Then, you're one of us! You believe in the equal distribution of food, regardless of species? We shall! We will fly in the face of the oppressors and their foolish laws! Leave no crust unnibbled!
So there is some seriously missed revolutionary potential going on here. And as a Marxist, I can't help but think of a variety of concepts that I really wished game developers or fantasy or fan creation makers considered when utilizing their creativity. This concept I keep bringing up is called the exceptionalism trope. The exceptionalism trope, or what's sometimes called the bootstrap narrative, describes stories where an oppressed individual overcomes systemic barriers not by challenging the system, but by becoming an exception to it. These narratives often tie into ideas like aspirational individualism or meritocracy myth, suggesting that success is possible despite systemic oppression as long as one works hard or is unique enough in their talents. Critics of storytelling and critical theory often view this as hegemonic assimilation instead of questioning or dismantling oppressive systems. These arcs validate them by implying they reward exceptional individuals. Classic examples include rags to riches stories, where a marginalized character rises to wealth or power within the same oppressive system, or the model minority narrative, where success comes from conforming to dominant culture. Ultimately, this trope shifts focus away from systemic inequalities and collective action, reinforcing the status quo rather than challenging it. So there are a ton of lessons in history when it comes to revolutionary movements and real-world oppression. Shout out to Comrade Workwear for Palestinian liberation with the PFLP. Let me just briefly talk about a few of those. So when it comes to historical events and revolutions, the obvious one is the Russian Revolution of 1917, where workers, peasants, and soldiers overthrew the autocratic Tsarist regime in February of 1917, and later the provisional government in October, leading to the establishment of the Soviet Union. It's an example of grassroots organizing, workers' councils or Soviets, the role of leadership like Lenin and the Bolsheviks, and collective action, a large-scale uprising where the oppressed overthrow entrenched systems of power. Or we could look at the Haitian Revolution of 1791 to 1804, where enslaved Africans in the French colony revolted, leading to the abolition of slavery and the creation of Haiti, the first Black-led republic. As themes of resistance to colonial and racial oppression, the fight for freedom, and revolutionary leadership, it overcame both racial and class oppression to claim self-determination. The history of worker strikes is particularly bountiful in examples if you want narratives to follow. The Battle of Blair Mountain in 1921, where coal miners in West Virginia waged an armed uprising against coal companies for better working conditions, fair pay, and union rights. It showed workers as rightful warriors against systematic exploitation. Or the Lawrence Textile Strike of 1912, where immigrant textile workers in Massachusetts, led by the IWW, fought for fair wages and better conditions. It's also known as the Bread and Roses Strike. It was cross-cultural solidarity, women-led, and all about human dignity, a diverse group of oppressed people uniting for both survival and joy. There's also the Flint sit-down strike of 1936 to 37, where auto workers in Michigan occupied General Motors factories, demanding union recognition and better condition. It was strategic resistance, an example of nonviolent protest and industrial unionism. Workers used direct action to challenge a powerful corporation. Outside of the many historical examples that we can look at, there's also some basic Marxist concepts and theories you might want to brush up on as well. There's the concept of class struggle, the ongoing conflict between the bourgeoisie, the owners of production, and the proletariat, the working class. Tieflings could represent the proletariat fighting against systemic exploitation by the elite. There's alienation, the separation of workers from the products of their labor, their own humanity, and their fellow workers under capitalism. A really important one here. Think of the oppressed Tieflings alienated from their cultural heritage or agency, fighting to reclaim it. There's dialectical materialism, the idea that history progresses through contradictions in material conditions like class conflicts, leading to revolutionary change. There's also false consciousness, a concept where the oppressed adopt the ideology of their oppressors, hindering collective action. The dictatorship of the proletariat, a transitional state where the working class seizes control of political power to dismantle class structures. I specifically want to see Tieflings creating a revolutionary revolutionary government after toppling their oppressors. And then my personal favorite, a term I coined and use often, revolutionary optimism, the belief in the inevitability of social progress and liberation through collective struggle, a hopeful narrative, this could be again about tieflings overcoming despair to reclaim their freedom, building a new world and a sense of self not built on the oppression and discrimination that they face, but rather what they can achieve, maybe even with those unique aspects of their heritage. By drawing from real struggles and theory, you can create a grounded and compelling narrative of revolution and resilience. And as I mentioned, there's so much potential in fantasy when it comes to creating revolutionary stories based off of these examples of the past that we have, or current things happening right now, when oppressed groups like tieflings, orcs, drow could form solidarity movements, dismantle systematic oppression, and imagine new worlds rooted in equality and justice, rather than individual success within the corrupt systems already standing. Fans and creators could reimagine Baldur's Gate 3 or D&D and their settings from a revolutionary perspective, focusing on grassroots uprising rather than noble quests for power within the same systems that oppress them. And we have some examples in Baldur's Gate specifically of this trope of the oppressed being the exception and becoming a noble or a ruler or something, right? In fact, my two favorite characters in Baldur's Gate kind of embody this. Their storylines and backgrounds have so much potential where they could have changed the structure or status quo. Those being Roland, the Tiefling wizard, one of the refugees you follow throughout the game and hopefully save because he deserves it, and Raphael. Guys, I know, I can justify all his war crimes. I have so much. Okay, wait, I need to. First of all, guys, even my wardrobe. My little brother drew me that. But I have all of this, right? Like, I collect Soviet stuff. Obviously, it's a mess because I'm making cosplay. Antique typewriter desk, artifacts, and cosplay. And then what's in here? Raphael merch. Raphael merch. Raphael. It's... Guys, there's more in here. Oh, wait, let me show you my keys. Cute bag from the 1950s, because when I'm not being a gremlin, I wear true vintage from the 30s through early 50s. And when I'm in Seattle and when I gotta use my public transportation, I do that with my Raphael. Fucking, oh my god. And Ascended Raphael. Ha 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 ha. Yeah, so I'm a fangirl, mostly for Raphael. But Roland has really snuck up in there recently. So next convention, I'm buying all the Roland fan art. Okay, fangirling over. Let's talk about their stories and how they play into this trope when they could have gone a completely different route. Okay, I hear you. You're like, Izdahar, how the fuck is Raphael a victim or oppressed in any way? I'll explain. In fact, I think Raphael's story is more straightforward. He's not a tiefling, but he is a cambion, a half-devil.
Call it a ninth sense. What's better than a devil you don't know? A devil you do.
Half mortal, half devil, and although his father is a powerful archdevil of hell, Mephistopheles, he clearly didn't get any of that privilege. He's just a bother. So much of a non-concern that his father gifted him an incubus to keep him busy, not even seeing him as a threat. But really, Raphael is quite impressive in that being just a half-devil, an outsider in both worlds, never fully a human mortal, never fully a devil that's taken seriously in hell, he still amassed this immense amount of power. We see that. He's incredibly powerful for just being a cambion, which is rather low on the social and power pyramid of the Hells. He clearly had to work far harder to maintain his high status in Hell, to obtain that power, to obtain that many souls, to get where he is at the point that we meet him in the game. Now, if you give him the Crown of Karsus, which you should, he deserves it, I think he actually has the potential to change things in this revolutionary way that I suggest.
And with all 9 hells under my command, I will end the blood war, Inferna Victoria, and look for new worlds to conquer.
But instead, his character is just ambitious. He wants power, he wants to be known. He's selfish, he's egotistical, sure, traits of the alignment of fiends in hell. It's lawful evil, right? But the things he claims could have a domino effect much greater than what is simply shown in the game. He says he wants to take down all of the archdevils, the current ruling archdevils. He wants to become the archdevil supreme of the hells, kill his father, get rid of all of these terrible leaders that have done nothing but maintain chaos. He wants to end the blood war, which is literally chaos, something no other devil has done. In theory, the ripple effects onto the material realm, like Faerun, would be immensely positive. Like, there's so many mortals in terrible situations because of other devils or Cambions. Every single corrupt leader that we see, every single nasty rich person in the upper city obtained their wealth through some sort of terrible means, many of those through deals with devils. And if the terrible reputation that tieflings have come from the horrors from the hells and the way that it is currently maintained, perhaps if Raphael toppled that system and created something new, there wouldn't be such a terrible reputation anymore. But again, because of his nature and the way that he's written as a character, he would likely just selfishly rule, becoming just as bad as those before him. I just really wish that that was something addressed. What would happen? What could happen if he became the ruler of the hells and everything maintaining the structure, causing pain and hurt and chaos and horrible power dynamic in the material realm was washed away? He could be that revolutionary leader that the tieflings need to fight back and change the way that they're perceived by the other races. And then there's Roland. Look at him. I like dramatic men. There's a consistency in my life, and it includes dramatic men.
They're my responsibility. You go save the world. Or your own arse. Or whatever it is you do. I'll fix this. I could do nothing right! Not a damn thing! So what if I was? Cal and Leah could be there. Instead, I found myself cornered by shadow fiends and in need of rescue. From you, of all bloody people. What good am I if I can't do this? This one thing.
So depending on how you play, Roland can become the new master of Ramzet's Tower. Already having dealt with a very hard life just as a tiefling alone, you learn from his background that Cal and Leah aren't his blood siblings, but rather he's either adopted or was taken in by their family. Because of the origins of tieflings, you know, it's lucky that they even make it alive, let alone to adulthood as an orphan. But something that's interesting is he never received formal training as a wizard. He's described as this, like, prodigy. Even though he's clearly, like, a bit older and not where he should be traditionally, he's described as being particularly talented. And it's really weird because you hear about how even before Elturel descended into the Hells, he was trying to apply to go to a traditional wizard school like Blackstaff, have a background like Gale. He sent many wizards letters to beg them to take him on as an apprentice. He had even sent Lororican multiple letters, he says. And finally, he's accepted. And you have to wonder, like, why is such a talented wizard being refused from the traditional schools or apprenticeship? Is it literally because he's a tiefling? Is it because he can't prove his heritage? Is he actually a wizard, or is he maybe a sorcerer? I mean, he doesn't have parents around alive or known to him to prove any sort of background that might be necessary. It's interesting that we can learn this about him through the game. Some of it is through talking to his corpse and speak to the dead. And it's like Gale has nothing to say. Someone who had so much privilege, well, despite being groomed, in the most traditional sense of being a learned man. How come he doesn't talk about the way that tieflings aren't accepted into the wizard school? How come we're not addressing why the only man to accept his apprenticeship was an abusive asshole who took advantage of the fact that he was an underprivileged tiefling and beat him instead of teaching him more magic? Structural flaws and issues that we learn through Roland's story and struggle and life purpose and disappointment when he gets his apprenticeship.
Boy, at the ready. Once I've taken control of the Asimar, she must go directly into the caging runes.
No, Master Lororican. I would never have assisted you if I knew you planned such horrors. You lied to get the Night Song here, made us all believe she was nothing but a relic. I have seen what true leadership can accomplish, but never under your tutelage.
Watch your tongue, you child. I could make it such that no wizard in the realm will touch you.
If they're all like you, I think that sounds like an excellent bargain.
Oh, face us, charlatan! We who detest you so!
But there's just no acknowledgement of that fucked up hierarchy in the realm of mages. But okay, you beat his terrible boss. He now, pirate rules, I guess, becomes the master of Remazit's tower. And he's so excited. And in fact, he has this proletarian communist view. You ask him, what is he going to do with this giant tower with the wealth of knowledge? And he immediately says that he's going to go through it, catalog things, and then share the knowledge with the world. He wants to distribute the knowledge instead of keeping it tucked away and badly organized like Lororican did.
Study and catalog it. Lororican barely knew his alphabet. Then share it with the realms. After all, it does little good collecting dust in an old tower.
So there's so much potential there where him being this super powerful wizard now in Baldur's Gate with a big tower in the upper city around all the rich people, which I'm sure makes them uncomfortable. He has the potential to not only change the way that magic and knowledge is accessed and freely available to others, but he is now this figure with power and capital within that same system that oppressed him. So is he going to change it? And that's what I want to know. That's what I want to see. I want to see him interacting with Gale and discussing these things. I want to see him trying to change it. But instead, we just get him satisfied now being a part of it. Okay, I'm proud of you. You made it that far, and you're going to distribute the knowledge. But the dashing master of the tower could do so much more for the people and for the tieflings. Not from just changing things from the inside, because that's not how things work, but by using that giant wealth of knowledge to dismantle the entire system. Now, wouldn't that be the perfect revenge for him? Anyways, I just think that both Raphael and Roland are great characters and stories and plot devices to really shake things up. With Raphael leading the Hells and changing the hierarchy, and the new master of Remazit's tower and all of the power and privilege that entails, being of these perceived to be lesser and discriminated against backgrounds, there is real potential for a devil spawn liberation movement. A mass changing of minds and attitudes. Larian, that's what I wanted. So yeah, the concept of escapism is quite often discussed in leftist Marxist spaces, and there's a lot of critique on how it's used to distract the working class, the majority of people who could potentially have an uprising and change the way of things. You can't become class conscious, aware and educated in your own oppression and the history of getting out of that when you have lots of distractions like super immersive MMORPG games. In fact, I made a short video about that on TikTok like a year ago, and people lost their damn minds about my critique, even though I obviously love Baldur's Gate. It's just interesting how as our oppression grows worse to conditions worse than, let's say, the French Revolution, and what made people rise up there, our forms of escapism become more immersive than ever, more time-consuming than ever, more intricate, beautifully and well-made. But it's interesting how that coincides with the level and extent of disparity and horror around us. Of course, it's natural to want and need escape. The working class needs some sort of rest. Even if you spend a good amount of your time reading and working within your community or trying to become class conscious, you can only consume so much before you exhaust yourself. And so it's more of a matter of moderation than no fun at all. Meh. Revolutionaries before us weren't all hard asses like we tend to imagine, or like dudes on Twitter try to pretend they are. Isn't reading a form of escapism? You can find pictures of Stalin playing folk games. Lenin notoriously loved to play chess. Like, yeah, don't waste away and spend all of your time in fantasy. Sometimes you periodically need it. And you know, it's actually a bad habit of mine to indulge too much in escapism. I have an embarrassing amount of hours in Baldur's Gate. In a particularly hard couple of months last year, Baldur's Gate kept me sane and away from doing anything stupid or saying anything stupid or making my situation worse when I had experienced the worst harassment I ever had in my life. Frankly, the people that were harassing me and spreading lies could have benefited as well from maybe playing Baldur's Gate or something equivalent. But I feel like we wouldn't even need to have this conversation if our extensive, more intricate and immersive ways of escaping these days included those revolutionary stories. If games like Baldur's Gate, where you could fully disconnect from reality, actually helped keep you in touch with the world and what's going on and the realities and struggles of others, not just fantasy racism of tieflings, but inspiring stories of the working class within that world and what they could achieve, what you could achieve as you play this brave traveler. But yeah, we need escapism as a tool, given the state of late-stage capitalism and what a lot of our lives look like, and how much time many of us are forced to spend working just to barely survive paycheck to paycheck. But wouldn't it be even cooler if that escapism taught us a lot about ourselves and our potential and inspired us to do greater things in our real life and inspired us to work towards a better future and to take action like those before us? It can be a tool of rest and relaxation in an overworked body and mind, but it can also be a tool of education and motivation. Being a hero of a story can give us a sense of empowerment, optimism for our own lives. I want that empowerment to include real revolutionary potentials. You don't have to just play hero in your game. You could do it for realsies. Again, given that level of immersion that we experience, where you can feel like you really are experiencing harrowing events of war and battle across Faerun. Of course, there are people right now facing horrors beyond your imagination in the midst of a genocide, fighting for their people's liberation. Do the freedom fighters in Palestine not have a similar story that you can empathize with? And if you really, for whatever reason, can't empathize with that, despite playing the hero in many games, maybe you could be a hero to your own people and save us from this capitalist hell. We are not an Elturel, but we have descended into something quite hell adjacent. And that really is something that bothered me about the Tiefling refugees in Baldur's Gate, that they were just these victims of oppression and discrimination. It can be incredibly problematic to only view people in these circumstances as oppressed people in needing of saving when they could very well be portrayed trying to fight back and save themselves. If the only time you're learning about other people's cultures and struggle is when you learn about the worst things that ever happened to them, but then you never see or learn about their culture, their villages, what their life is like. An example, as a Soviet historian, I'm often met with people who are like, how dare you, you disgusting human being. How could you celebrate this? When gives an example of a minority group in a former communist country being oppressed or not treated well, usually leaving out circumstance or context, right? Crimean Tatars is a really good example, the whole topic, but even my people, the Danube Swabians, were also treated terribly during and after World War II because they collaborated with Nazis, okay? A lot of Danube Swabians, Chechens, same thing. There's a collaboration. The way that they handled that after the fact wasn't the best. Certainly not. You didn't need to deport them and take away their things, but that is what happened. But the thing is, when people talk about, like, Crimean Tatars in a, oh, I got you, explain that, commie trash, it's really messed up that the only thing they know about these people is their oppression, is the worst moments of their life, not their culture. They can't point out a village on a map. They can't tell you a single thing about what they eat, what they do, what they look like, their cultural dress. You know nothing about these people you're using to pity and as a point in your argument, other than literally the most traumatic moments of their life. Crazy. And we do the same thing in games. You could play Baldur's Gate multiple times and learn nothing about the culture and lives of tieflings other than their oppression and fantasy racism. I apologize in advance for the amount of jingling that you're going to hear. Everyone in my life is so tired of it by now, and probably my neighbors. Also, for the men who hate how much makeup I wear, here you go. So previously I spoke about how only knowing the worst things that happen to someone when it comes to their culture is really problematic. And like the same thing happens with Muslim women or hijabis. Like I submitted a panel for Emerald City Comic Con or a friend of mine and I want to talk about being visibly Muslim in fandom spaces. And I have lots of interesting experiences from when I was really active in the community when I was a teenager and young adult versus now. And just the way I'm treated differently. And then I recently came to the realization that this is also something I complain about, that if my panel is approved, which, you know, I'm sure it will be, token Muslims and all that. If it is, I'll let you know so you can come and either cheer me on or hate on me, I guess. But then I'm just going, But then I'm just going to be perpetuating this same thing where the only time that Muslim women, visibly Muslim women, are given representation in things is when they talk about their struggles or wearing the hijab or being Muslim, when the kind of casual inclusion that we want would not necessarily focus on that because you're only further ostracizing yourself instead of integrating into normalcy, right? Anyways, now we get to the fun part. So when it comes to escapism, it doesn't have to be devoid of meaning or skill or application to reality. Games like Baldur's Gate 3 allow us to explore powerful themes and messages through that lens of fantasy. You can adventure and make a difference, save people, save the world. So offering opportunities to reflect on real-world issues like discrimination, which, it slightly touches on, inequality, or even revolution should still be doable, all while enjoying the narrative and gameplay. Escapism can be both relaxing and empowering with its messaging. Instead of constantly being the victim or the exception, if the victims of oppression rose up and overthrew the oppressors, what is so wrong with that? Fantasy media should more often portray this. Even when depicting oppression, you can still make it empowering by giving the oppressed more options than just enduring it. Unless this really is all intentional. Would a game be less likely to be greenlit by a studio if it had these themes? Real revolutionary themes? Excluding first-person shooters or war games. I mean, the type of games rarely actually include the stories of real everyday people who aren't soldiers. They're very... It's like my issue with military strategy maps, how they're so void of humanity. It never actually includes the everyday people that just live in that war zone. War games do the same. They completely lack humanity and narrative of the real people there. I don't want to empathize with a soldier either doing the work of an empire or stuck with the only option of defending themselves. I want the real everyday people just trying to survive. Either way, I really want more hopeful, empowering messages in fantasy that tie between this revolutionary optimism I want to see and the escapism really provides everything I'm looking for. A chance to not just unwind from the daily grind, but also imagine new possibilities, but for justice in a world that often feels very stacked against us. That would have the subtle impact of education, encouraging people to think critically about the systems of oppression in both the game world and the real world. When we see tieflings rise up, we might be reminded of our own capacity to resist in our own societies. So engaging in these meaningful forms of escapism can help us face reality, help us believe in the possibility of change, instead of just needing to retreat to that escapism all the time. We can emulate it. Let me finish getting into cosplay and tell you a little bit about how I plan to combine these two things at conventions while in this cosplay. You might find it amusing, comrades. Horns are on. Hijab is secured. Here is the tail that I made. I tried to get those ridges in and like a spine going all the way down, but I kind of gave up when I got to the end. As you can tell, there's a terrible, terrible seam, but it'll do for now. I attached it to a belt, and I gotta put that on first before I put the corset or stays on. They're more like stays, but not really historically accurate, of course. I wish I had a better way of securing it, but that's kind of what I got. And then there's these. I put some boning in it and made it tighter. Still not as structured as I want it, but it's good enough. It could be tighter because really she has a purple underlay here and everything isn't tied completely shut. But and then of course the claws. Horns aren't even in frame. All right. That's just about it. Except one more thing. She is a bard after all. And while I can't sing or play the balalaika, I have rewritten some labor songs to be about tieflings. So I might just learn some simple chords and be ridiculous at conventions and sing those. Because last time that I was at a Baldur's Gate cosplay meet, there was one Alfira cosplayer and she had a ukulele and everyone was like, play a song, and she didn't know how to play. And I'm like, if I'm in that situation, I'm gonna sing for the plight of my fellow tieflings. But yeah, so far I have rewritten like What Side Are You On? And The Banks of Marble. I can always talk sing. Banks of Marble has been covered by a lot of punk bands and they tend to like more talk sing. So instead of like the normal chorus for the lords sit in their towers with soldiers at their gates and they hoard their precious gold from the tiefling they berate. You see where I'm going? It's good. I even like rally in the other oppressed races. Like I saw the silent drow folk faced with endless spite and heard the half-orcs murmur that we shared this endless fight. There's so much you can do. How has no one done this before? Anyways, so when it comes to the ways incorporate, you know, my ideology as a communist, I actually created these leaflets inspired by leaflets from the Russian Revolution that call for a tiefling revolution, and I'm going to be handing those out. I really love how conventions have evolved to be a place for people like trade trinkets. The last con I went to, I think my badge is in here. Okay, yeah, the last convention I went to was Sakura Con, and I was cosplaying Sister Lidwin, and I went to a Baldur's Gate meetup, and I got these ribbons. I got, she boulders my gate till I, yeah, you know, and God's favorite princess, Shadowheart. Maybe that's what triggered the really awkward conversation, because I was completely covered. No one knew that I'm Muslim or wear a headscarf in my day-to-day life. And I brought it up, and I couldn't remember why it was brought up, but I remember it was relevant, and I'm like, oh, I am God's favorite princess, you know? I actually wear a hijab normally. And then all the casual conversation awkwardly stopped. And no one else really talked to me after that, and except for this one Astarian cosplayer who, after the con, I found on Facebook, and he had like a thin blue line, like profile picture on Facebook. So I needed those leaflets. Anyways, I love that people do this kind of thing. And I also got like a pin that was the if you let Astarian drink your blood, the negative effect that you get the next day, it has that on it. I'm gonna hand out revolutionary leaflets and sing labor and protest songs related to the plight of the tiefling. And I think that's a really fun way to combine the actual, you know, reality and story and struggle of the character that I am portraying. Like, I traveled across this realm from Elturel to Baldur's Gate. I'm putting it in the songs. The burden that we face. But yeah, like, portraying a tiefling bard like Alfira, also Alfira, that's a Muslim name. Are some of these tieflings not Muslim coded or what? I want to portray this while reclaiming a space for marginalized voices. And it can be really disappointing how, not only how games exclude revolutionary narratives or minorities fighting back, but even like Muslims in general, like in character creation, very rarely is there an option to cover your hair. I think there are like some forms of head covering that you can acquire relatively fast. Like I think one of the druids in the Grove has a sort of hijab-esque hat that you can get if you kill them. But you can't start off with a hijab, and that makes me upset. And I feel like realistically, there should be more characters created in all forms of media that are like fully covered to some extent. Alfira, alhamdulillah, slapping on a hijab doesn't even feel that off. You still absolutely know which character I am, and the rest of her is fully covered. Although, is it immodest to have a bare tail, do you think? But yeah, like, I just wish more shows and games and, you know, fantasy in general had more options for Muslim or hijabi cosplayers. Or, again, you don't have to be Muslim to want to cover your body or feel more comfortable wearing more clothing. There's so many reasons why someone might want to cover up. And I feel like there should be an option for everyone. I don't know if any of you have ever played the Arcana. Well, meh. Julie and Devarok, though. Plague Doctor eye patch? Come on. Okay, I'll stop. But I used to love the Arcana, and one of my favorite things was one of the characters, Asra, his parents, you know, it was all very Muslim coded, and his mom wore hijab, and I wanted to cosplay her so bad. And then there was this big, like, dramatic outrage, not from actual Muslims, not from people who wore hijab like me, but from people saying, no, it's offensive because she uses magic and that's un-Islamic. This is fantasy. Okay, who are you to say what Allah has gifted someone? And because of this outrage by loud, angry voices, people who weren't even, like, affected by this, they literally took her hijab off. They changed her entire character design. And so now, like, one of the few games I was super into at the time that had a character I could cosplay, she was removed, taken away, because the most combative, reactionary, loud voices tend to be more destructive to the people they're trying to protect than the little bit of inclusion that this game actually had, you know? And when you cater to those loud reactionary voices, you're actually taking away from people like me who, regardless of their story or background or whether or not it 100% aligns with the perfect ideal Muslim, you got rid of my one option. But now who can I cosplay from the Arcana? I guess, like, the doctor guy with gauze all over his face, and I guess I'm a sucker for spooky practitioners of medicine and horns, apparently. But anyways, keep your eyes out for me at conventions in the Seattle area, because I'll be handing out revolutionary tiefling propaganda. We got nothing to lose but our chains, fellow tieflings. I don't know if this gets everything. I feel like maybe I'm missing something. I got so caught up in actually putting this on in the end. I don't know if I'm forgetting anything. Hopefully you all understand what I'm trying to say. We definitely need more narratives of pushing back and uprising, especially in this world that absolutely needs more pushback from the marginalized and the growing divide between the oppressed and the oppressors. Tieflings are the perfect avenue for that, in my opinion, especially from the storyline where you are a hero fighting for many of those oppressed. But what do you think? Do I make a good Alfira? Do you have any games to suggest that do have these narratives that are decent and that isn't like military propaganda? Let me know. Now I'm gonna make the most out of all of this, as it is 1 o'clock on a Thursday. I'm gonna film some TikToks or something. Anyways, assalamu alaikum, comrades. Please be inspired by history and have a great day. I appreciate you.